I'll begin by just saying thank you to Dhwani and Keshav for inviting me to speak with Monika today about her friendship with Haku Shah. In the past month and a half or two of the exhibition, different facets of Haku Shah's life and work are slowly kind of revealing themselves. Here in the show itself, we are seeing the paintings, we're seeing photographs documenting the process of making clay pots, toys, and also an extraordinary collection of sculptures from Hakubai's collection, especially in the room there and in these two rooms here. So this is a very rich program put together by Keshav and Dhwani and Jesal, Thacker, the curator, and Parthiv, Haku Shah's son. And the several events that have happened, including Vidya Shah's performance, where she included children's songs and lullabies alongside songs by Kabir and Surdas, all shone a light a little bit on different aspects of Haku Shah's own kind of mental frame. Firoza Godrej and Rashna Gandhi also spoke 2 weeks back about their friendship with Hakubai and early support by exhibiting his work. And Monika, as Keshav said, has known him from the early 60s, and all of this group of people have known and cared for Haku Shah's many gifts and genius and help us understand and appreciate more fully the arc of his complex and unique talents. It's picking up? Should I put it away? Or? Okay, thank you. So, my background is very modest. When I studied at the School of Architecture in Ahmedabad in the early 80s, I took a class with Haku Shah on folk art. And at that time, a lot of us, and me included, were not really interested and appreciative of folk art. We'd grown up in Mumbai, went to Western-speaking schools, English language, and not really tuned into a kind of rural and folk and tribal aesthetic. So I feel that at that time I did not pay attention to his work. But now I feel, reading over these last 10 or more years, his writings, his interviews, his photographs, I think for this book on clay, he's made thousands of photographs. And here you're seeing reproductions, but actually in the books themselves, the two of them, votive terracottas of Gujarat and the many forms of clay, the photographs are absolutely fantastic. They're like beautifully printed and they're like really exquisite in the way that they are sequenced and placed. So I felt like that, alongside his analytical drawings. I think today I just sent Monika one of his little sketches of the making of a horse sculpture, the different tubes and the different elements. But they're also deceptively simple, but they're actually revealing a lot about the process of making. And I feel that all these things come together. And another aspect was his writing. I always thought that the writing was in service of his research. But actually, when you read them in these two books more than even his other books, you realize that it's superbly observed, patiently described, the process of making, and with real care and respect and love. The writing itself is really, really remarkable, I think, and I would encourage you to actually read it. In a way, now looking back, both of these books are out of print. There's one copy of votive terracottas available on Amazon India for 12,500 rupees. But I found a digital copy online. But I encourage you to actually read it because this is a record of these studies, and a lot of it has probably disappeared. So I just mentioned this Forms and Many Forms of Mother Clay and the Votive Terracottas of Gujarat, both books for you to look at. Before I ask Monika questions, I wanted to just read out two little paragraphs from Haku Shah's Votive Terracottas book to give you a sense of his voice, his writer's voice. Many of you might have known him and have understood it, but I feel that he's reaching beyond pure description. He's able to think of the larger kind of schema of the making of these sculptures. So here is Hakubai. I'll just read these two sentences out. I've gone into, this is in Hakubai's words, I've gone into considerable detail in describing the craftsman's know-how, in reproducing the speech of the potters and tribals, in relating the myths and legends in which they believe, because I'm convinced that a world of meaning is conveyed by each of these. Thus, technique reflects scientific knowledge, speech reflects societal attitudes, usage reflects the religious approach to an object, and myths and legends throw light on the whole shadowy world of hopes and dreams and faith. Beautiful. And in a way, it helps us think about his own art practice too, because he's paying such close attention to this work. One other paragraph I'll just read. He says, in central and south Gujarat, cows and calves are revered by farmers, and the figures are also used as votive terracottas. With just a few lumps of clay, a hollow jar is transformed into a calf, its simplicity testifying to the ingenuity of the creator. Almost completely bereft of detail, it nevertheless demonstrates a fine sense of form. So here is an artist, not just an ethnographer, not just a researcher, able to look at these objects with an incredible eye. So I just wanted to put that and to allow for Hakubai's words to just stay with us as we speak. And I'll ask Monika to begin a little bit. So I wanted to just jump in, Monika, with a quick question. Monika mentioned to me that from the 60s, when she would visit Ahmedabad and was spending time in Ahmedabad when Charles was doing his many projects, Gandhi Ashram in the late 50s, and that she would accompany Hakubai on his visits to craftsmen and actually in Ahmedabad and heard him and watched him conduct these interviews. And even though she said that she didn't follow the Gujarati exactly, she could really understand the exchange and how the craftsmen were explaining their use of materials and their process. So I think, Monika, you had mentioned mud cloth, you mentioned Dabu right now, you mentioned the Matajini Pachedi and Saroja's applique work. But could you just give a few examples of how these visits turned out and what it was like to kind of hang with Hakubai during these interviews?
Okay, let me start. I don't know how I got roped into this, because as many of you know, that it was Charles who did all the speaking in the family. And so, anyway, but I'll go back to my memory of the 60s. Charles had been very involved in the National Institute of Design. And at that time, there was Charles Eames, there was William Wollert from Denmark, and they were assigned to look around the country and choose a spot for the National Design Institute. And they went around and they came back with the idea that it should be Bangalore. And why? Because Bangalore didn't have prohibition. And he said, artists like to have, over a glass of wine, whatever it is. But the Sarawais came up with this thing of offer of land. And so the government of India took it up. And so that's how it got to be in Ahmedabad. Now, we'd go back and forth. And when the NID building was just starting up, there was in the courtyard a wonderful set of horses. I mean, I hadn't seen them before, because the only horses that I knew were the Bankura horses, and we had a whole family of them at home from Calcutta. But I asked Gira, and she said, well, these are votive terracottas, and the only person who knows about them is Haku Shah. So that's how we got to meet Haku. And he talked about the Tanjore horses. He said, they were votive, people would not part with them. But Haku, because he was just wonderfully quiet, and shall I use the word pure, because it's pure in inverted commas, he would get around people to understand why he thought they were very special. And so he talked to them, and then he asked whether he could take some back to Ahmedabad. They were horrified. I mean, they could never part with them. They were just left outside and around the tree. And but Haku, in his very gentle way, managed to convince them that this is for a school of design and all sorts. And they did part. I think there must have been 5 or 6 horses there at NID. So we spoke to Haku and all sorts and things. And the next time I went to Ahmedabad, and Charles would go often for this project. So when I spoke to Haku, I said, I'm here and I'd like to hear more about what you said about the horses and all. He said, come, he said, Monika, but I'm going today to see about these Dabu prints. So if you'd like to think, you can come with me. So I was very thrilled and pleased to think. So I went. Now this really happened, I should really go back, that Charles Eames had suggested to Gira Sarabhai that if you're having a National Institute of Design, you must document the crafts of India. So I think Haku was taken on as, the person who could, document this. So we went, Haku and I went to, it was Manek Chowk and Mirzapur and all sorts. And we went to this place, go down where they were printing these Dabu prints, the mud prints that they call. And now they didn't quite like the idea of an outsider coming in. These were their trade secrets. And but Haku sort of, again, as a very gentle way, he'd stand there, he'd look, then he'd say, so what are you doing this for? And then they'd tell him, they'd ask, but how much mud do you put in this? What do you do it for? And I'd be standing there, of course, and they weren't upset with my presence because I was wearing these very coarse handloom saris, which I loved. So they were 8 rupees and 10 rupees sari, which I'd get from handloom house. So they felt I was one of them, and they'd talk. And Haku would very quietly ask them, what the composition of the dye was, what they did, what the temperature was. And then he'd come away, and Haku would remember everything that he'd asked them for. Then we went to other places. Then we went to Manek Chowk, which had these, beautiful red and black tie-dye bandhani chadars. And they'd be used out to dry on the Sabarmati river, the dry Sabarmati. And Haku would show me and explain to me what. So I got to know really what he was all about. Then at one point he showed me a dye that they were used. It was an oil-bound dye. And he said that it was called Rogan. I don't know if you've heard of it really, but I had never seen anything like that before. And it was it wasn't something I liked also very much. The mud prints, I was, they were beautiful, the blue and red. It was on indigo, red with the indigo. But these Rogan prints I wasn't very mad about, and I think there was only one place in Ahmedabad that did it. Otherwise, I think it's from Kutch, is it? But Haku very kindly always give me a little piece left, so I had a piece of this Rogan this thing, and then one day he sort of talked to me about the patchwork applique that he'd seen around. He was documenting that. And he said, there's a woman here who, she's just an ordinary thing, the wife of one of these workmen around. And he'd come to him and asked Haku to find a job for her. And Haku said she's really quite an unusual person. He said, she gets into a trance, he said, and that seemed very strange. He said she would go wild, she would dance and all this, and when she would get into this trance, he would give her these pieces of cloth, and she would do applique work. And that was quite unusual from all the other, villagers, village women who did that. And he said he'd got someone in San Francisco to sponsor an exhibition. This woman's work was unique. I mean, in fact, Haku did give me a little piece of it, which I think looked very Matisse-like, it was that sort of. So it was quite different from what the usual village women did. And Haku saw that, and he sort of encouraged her really to think. And she had an exhibition in San Francisco, so she got quite a big clientele, and on and on. What else did he show me now? I can't remember. Yes, that. But that I had already seen, but we'd go down there and they do it in just in reds and blacks thing on white background, and that was very good. But what I really found very thing was that I don't think anyone else would have been able to get all this information out of these villagers. These were trade secrets and they would never part with it. They didn't even part with it to their daughters because they felt that the daughters, when they got married, would go to another family. So it was, and that was what was wonderful about Haku. He was a very gentle person, very thing, and he managed to get them to understand him, and he would get to understand them. And I really sort of enjoyed those. Then, in between all that, he started to talk about the votive terracottas in North Gujarat. And there again, he showed me a few samples that he had collected. Now there again, they were votive terracottas, so that they found their way to a tree, and they wouldn't part with them. No one could touch them, But Haku managed somehow to get it, and he had a collection of them. And because I was very, interested in them, he gave me one, and that was so it graced our living room, and for years and years. But then I think with the temperature and all sorts, it got brittle and the rider fell off. But I've still got the horse. And then came little other ones. I think there's one back there which is, he gave it to me. But Haku was very, I think he understood that I was very interested in it. So he'd part with, a little one here, a big one there. And I would just say that the last time we went to Ahmedabad, we went to see Haku because they told us he was not well and he didn't go out. So we went, Charles and I went down, and there was this narrow staircase that led up to his home. And on each of the stairs was a horse, one of those horses from North Gujarat. And it was lovely to go up, climbing those stairs with all these horses and all this. So when I got there, it was wonderful really to see these horses and all this. He said, you choose whatever you want. And I thought, my God, I'd really like one of those large ones, but I didn't know how I'd be able to carry it to Bombay. But so I chose a middle-sized one, and the municipality who had asked Charles to come in said, don't worry, we'll get it across. But Haku was very, very, generous really thing. And one of the many, many things I treasured besides the horses was that little piece of saroj, the applique, which is just a very beautiful piece. And I treasure it. So that last time when we went Haku, I was very saddened really about it all. And then I said, I'd like to have a painting of yours. So so Charles and I chose one, and we paid for it, of course. And but it was, the last sort of thing that we have of Haku's. But I hope. Well, I think I have to go back because that Haku was a very easy person to get along with. What nice was he never hesitated to give you all the information he had, and he took me, wherever went. And one of the things was when he'd come to Bombay, he'd come straight after he got off the train and all this and got himself breakfast, he'd come to the office. And then he would tell us, what he'd been doing, and he'd very sweetly say, till where I told you last, and he'd continue from that point on. And he took Charles Eames around. Charles Eames was then commissioned to do the Nehru exhibition, and he wanted a lot of artifacts from India, and Haku took him around all over Ahmedabad. And every now and again, Haku would show him this and that, and Charles Eames would be photographing wildly. I mean, he was a wonderful photographer, besides making films and so he looked at Haku and said, "You're not taking any pictures?" And Haku said, "I don't have a camera." And Charles Eames went on and Haku showed him a lot of things. At the airport, when Charles Eames was leaving, he took his camera and gave it to Haku. And Haku was very touched. And but the next day, when he got to NID, he was told that that gift was for NID, and it was not a personal gift. And it was the only time I saw Haku shaken. Otherwise, he was very placid, very easy, but that really hurt him a lot. And so I don't know whether he eventually got a camera or not, but not that one that Charles Eames gave him. And I think soon after that, he decided to move to to a tribal museum, you know, which I visited that too. But in a way, he grew much more really, you know, from that point on. But I think if all that documentation of the textiles and the horses and all that was very much due to Haku Shah. I mean, what we all have and what we know today, and books that have been written about all this, they all fall back onto Haku's information, really, that he dealt with. And so I think both Charles and I were very happy to have him as a friend and I must say that, you know, everyone who met with him, like the Eameses, Charles and Ray Eames, Leo and Nora Leone. Leo Leone was asked to come to NID to make films. He'd written a lot of children's books and all this. So Leo came in. Leo was enraptured with Haku, and he talked a lot about him. Then there were a lot, I mean, Buckminster Fuller and everything. So Bucky, you know, they all got very fond of Haku. They admired him for his knowledge, and very quiet knowledge. And he never sort of, you know, made out that he knew everything. He would very gently tell you, you know, the things about it all. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, but it was really, he was a good friend, and we liked him very much. And that's it. And so, oh God, I thought I talked enough.
I wanted to just backtrack for a second, that before you went to Ahmedabad, the interest in everyday craft textiles, like you were visiting Handloom House, where did that come from? Like your own interest in, you'd once mentioned that Charles said the way you collected saris was like everyday saris, but
I really don't know where it came from, because my mother was not very interested in saris, and they basically, you know, came from Mangalore, so that if you wore a sari outside, it was a silk sari. You only wore cottons in the house. But in Bangalore, when I'd gone there in '58, there were a lot of these what they call temple saris. They were votive offerings, and they piled up so much in the temples that they, you know, wanted to get rid of them. So they were sent out, and people bought them and then resold them. And my sister told me about these temple saris. And when I saw them, they were just beautiful things, the red and gold and the pink and gold and the weaving and all this. And I thought, my God, we're never going to see, you know, saris like this again. So I bought them, and my sister wouldn't, because she felt, you know, they were used, given to the temple and all this, so she wouldn't. But I thought they were just so beautiful, those things, they'll never be woven again. So I bought them, and they were saris, what of red with gold checks was 45 rupees, something else was 80 rupees. And in fact, one that was really like a cloth of gold, and it was very beautiful. They were little diamonds, and the diamonds got larger and larger. And within the diamonds, then there would be a deer there would be the parrots, there would be, different birds and animals, till they finally ended up at the pallu, which was very enriched and thing. And that sari I bought for 500 rupees. That was a lot of money at that time, but I bought that. And I'd open it out and look at it and fold it and put it back again in the cupboard. I'd started to collect things. But in fact, I talked about these saris to Kidder Smith. I was telling you, this architect, photographer in New York. And his wife, when she heard me saying this, she said, "Monika, I wish you'd get me one." So I said, "Well, they're quite easy to do, I will." But I did get her one, but then I said, how do I send it across to New York? And it just so happened that Haku was going to New York, I think maybe for the Festival of India, I'm not sure when. But he went, so Dot Kidder-Smith said, told Haku, "Look, when you come, why don't you stay for dinner? I'd like to have some friends, meet you." And so Haku went very early, about 1 hour earlier. And Dot, of course, there you had to do your own cooking and all sorts. So she didn't know what to do with Haku. So she said, "Look, I'll give you a book, a thing." And Haku said, "You got some paper?" He said, I'll sit down. So she gave him some paper, and he pulled out a pen, and he made these wonderful drawings for this 1 hour. And then he gave her the drawings. And that, she said, she was, she would treasure really. But that was so sweet of Haku that he did. He said, "No, I think you give me some paper, I'll spend my time." And he drew this up. I think there were three pages of drawing, and he gave them. But that's how it is. So I got involved in textiles and all this, and further down. And then, strangely enough, a friend of mine took me to Handloom House. And I was stunned, because at that time one saw saris from all over India. You got, saris from Coimbatore, from Andhra, and also, and they were beautiful saris. It was really Pupul Jayakar's creation, really, this Handloom House. And it was only afterwards I realized, I was stunned at the shop too, and everything. Only afterwards I realized it was Charles who had designed the shop too, for Pupul. And but that Handloom House was my mainstay. The office was, close by. So at lunchtime I would go down to Handloom House and look at all the beautiful saris, and I learned about the weaving, the Assam silk, the Muga silk, which was, different kinds of silk. Now at that time, there were all sorts of things for men too, and there were these beautiful, what they call raw silk ties. And those were designed by Alexander Girard. Only afterwards I found out that Pupul had invited Alexander Girard to, that NID and HAGC, Handloom and Handicrafts Corporation, really did something for textiles in India, and way before we even knew what was happening. And so, I got to see all this work there in Handloom House, and there were, I think those people also got to see that I was very interested in this. They'd show me what was here. And once when I was about to buy one, there was a Mrs. Padma, I think, there, and she told me, she said, don't buy it now, don't buy it. So I said, "Why?" She said, "Next week there's Handloom Week, and you'll get a 10% discount. So you wait, I'll keep the sari for you. And so, it was, I guess, encouragement really from everyone. It was a kind of period really where, handlooms really were, the big thing really. And then I got to the Weaver Service Center, and I saw, K.G. Subramanyan there and also. Then there were other people like Jack Leonard Larson, who was invited by Pupul Jayakar. So you got to see a lot that was happening outside of India too, and they were invited. And Jack Leonard Larson went all around, went to Kanchipuram, and he came back and he sort of told me that, there was wonderful work in Kanchipuram. And he said he saw sari there, and he said, those are unusual colors, he said. So this Veerappan said, well, there's someone from Bombay, Mrs. Correa, who came in and chose these colors. So Jack Leonard Larson came back to the Weaver Service Center, I was there, and he told Sojwa, the director, give her whatever she wants, he said, because, so in a way it was very encouraging really. That Weaver Service Center was a wonderful place at the time. You had weavers from all over India come in and in different rooms, so you got to see what was happening. And I think Haku, you said, was asked to come. So it was a very good mixture of both Indian painters and weavers, and and foreigners also coming in. So then that was it.
Yeah, it is interesting that your life tracks a little bit with Haku Shah's, because he started at the Weaver Service Center and then went to NID. And slowly now, I think art galleries are paying attention to what these artists like KG and Subramanyan and Bendre and others made at the Weaver Service Center, and it's entering the art world in a different way. I don't know how good or...
No, the Weaver Service Center encouraged even modern designs, and they had a whole studio, and there were some very fine artists there, Vakela, and a whole lot of names now that I can't remember. But they would give their designs in, to the weavers to do. And K.G. Subramanyan came in, and he would spend 3 months in the year at the Weaver Service Center. And it was the first time I saw this hand-spun rough wool, which KG used. And he had what he called fiber sculptures, which were sort of huge cylinders of weaving, and then 2 little arms and 2 little legs that emerged from it. But they were very beautiful, and the hand-spun wool was, that I think awakened in me, and I've used it always right through that hand-spun wool. It was, the texture, it had a lot of grit in it, and took on color very beautifully. And so that I mean, it's sad now, it's all fizzled out. One thing is that they've got it for power looms and all sorts, so that but all the weavers really, their children have moved into computers and all sorts. And it's sad, but it's a dying art.
Monika, just dug out. When I first graduated from Ahmedabad and came to Bombay, I did an interview with Monika in 1989, and it was on her tapestries for New York.
Yeah, but we're going away from Haku Shah.
Yeah, I know, but I was going back to the wool, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that point out because it'll come a little bit to Haku Shah's paintings. And in there, I asked, what is the key difference between a painting and a tapestry now that you work at wall hangings or an art object in a sense? And your answer was, and I'll just read it out.
I remember.
You remembered, okay. It is just a different medium that you're working in. In some ways, I would consider my tapestries as paintings, but I'm not using oils, I'm using wool. Wool has instant texture that helps tremendously. What is difficult about tapestries is to get the feeling of light. Painting, in that sense, is very emotional and evocative because it is bringing light in. It is very tough putting it in tapestries. And then you mentioned one of your, the one monsoon you mentioned is successful because I've managed to get light from the cloud, the silver light. It's not so easy, like one cannot imagine a Turner painting in tapestry or a Vermeer. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Vermeer, I think that's
Wool. Yeah. I don't know how we are doing on time, but there was one more thing, Monika, I was going to mention, and that's kind of from a catalog essays of yours, because again, it speaks to painting and tapestry, and I was wondering about that. So you say, and this is a little bit tied in, if you see all the photographs and a lot of Haku's writing is very much focused on the hands and the actual making and handling of material. Every group of images that you look at, they're very, very focused on that. The books also have the objects photographed, but they're mostly in the process of being made, and the hands is a very important thing. So in this little essay in your catalog, you say, weaving is a slow process. You create the piece strand by strand, like a mason placing bricks that go into making an edifice. And this bestows a conviction and an authenticity that mere paint on canvas can seldom attain. On the other hand, you mention Akbar Padamsi so incisively pointed out when he opened your show, first exhibition at Pandol, that the gesture of the painter's brush sweeping diagonally across a canvas is not possible for the weaver, whose hand must move horizontally along the loom. So you say that Akbar is right. The visual world is created by the weaver, seemingly similar to that of a painter, is really fundamentally quite different. And this I kind of bolded from your text, you say, for the pleasure of weaving is the joy of seeing form and color gradually unfold and come to life through the movement of your fingers, partly through chance and partly through the expressive qualities inherent in the materials themselves. So to recognize that wonderful moment and to catch it in the play of warp against weft is the essence of art. So I was interested in this idea of, the slowness of making. I mean, today's art world and the way art is produced, especially digitally, it's just so speeded up. And so much of the process of thinking that you constantly say happens in the slowness and in the decision making and ideas that you cancel out or you build on.
Also the horizontal and the vertical differs, because when horizontal you just go across. When you go up vertical, you have to interlock, if you want a band. And that piece is the one that MoMA took. It's just a brown, black and white. And the white, white goes vertically. And you can see the difference, between the horizontal and the vertical. It gets a tooth edge thing, which is quite, I was surprised when they took it because it was very plain, I think, but they said, no, we like it because it shows construction really, And
yeah, so I was trying to think of, while Haku's paintings, I think in the curator's walkthrough, there was something about the feminine form and the idea of the vessel But there are so many other elements to the process of making that are then also possibly picked up by Haku Shah that are not visible per se, but they're in the process of handling and making or thinking. But I was just wondering to kind of connect it to your own art practice and the way that you make.
No, in fact, now that you pointed out, it's always, the hands that Haku has around, on his paintings. They are very strong images of a hand.
Okay. Should we open it up and take questions? I'm sure everyone here knows a lot more and would like to ask. Actually, before we do that, yeah. Yeah. I was just going to try and close it with the Hakubai quote, but if we want to open it up to questions, I don't. Yeah. So I just say this in a way, this art-craft divide is like a long-standing thing and it has always stayed. But here in the concluding paragraphs of his Votive Terracottas book, he says that clay plays a vital part in the life of rural India, particularly that of tribals. As a tribal from central Gujarat said to Hakubai, Jiv itle mati nu defu, meaning life is just a lump of clay. After all, their material equipment, their huts, their fields, in fact, everything around them is composed of clay. So it's kind of, as you sift through these interviews, you realize how profound the thinking of these craftsmen actually is and how they're able to think beyond the day-to-day, I have to make 20 pots today or whatever. So he then continues to say, each object is made for a specific purpose with sincerity, dedication, and love. Tribal art is an intrinsic part of life, deeply and spontaneously felt and untainted by extraneous considerations. There are no separate compartments for art or craft. These are just simple adjuncts to the process of living. That I think is quite beautiful, actually, as a way to think. And actually, most of these terracottas on the mountain or in a field, beside a river or under a grove of trees, are destroyed by the elements, sun, wind, rain, or fire. So the idea that museums are going to keep them for centuries, these things are 500 years old, and you've kind of preserved them and fixed them and repaired them, it's a different sense of that. And then he says, referring to the tribal offerings at a sanctuary, you will see in the book there are these beautiful double-page spreads of these landscape where there are hundreds of these horses with flags and things in there. So he says, when I witness a ritual like this of the sanctuary, he says, my mind sees the entire psychic panorama. I see the white and red flags flying, the terracottas quickened by sacrificial blood, the chanting, the trances, the crowds of tribals mingling with each other in reverential mood. The ritual, this feast of color and devotion of which all partake, carries satisfaction for everyone. The gods, the terracottas, the tribals themselves, and the ever-present spirits all around. Again, just a way of thinking of what worlds we inhabit and what else is part of this world for us.
Yeah, I thought of Jyotindra Jain's exhibition, The Other Masters, because all of us talk about painters really as the masters, and we just dismiss the tribal artist as the tribal artist or a folk artist, but Hussain and Akbar Padamsi and Rai Mehta and all are the masters. And Jyotindra Jain, when he was director of the Crafts Museum, National Crafts Museum, he had an exhibition called The Other Masters. And it was, he said, these tribal artists, what you call tribal, he said, they also grow. I mean, they start off on something, then few years later they moved on to something else. And so he had 5 artists at the museum. One was Saroj Devi, no? The Madhubani, Sarojini, the Madhubani artist. There was another one who was a potter, an Assamese potter. And now women are not allowed to use a potter's wheel. So she had to, roll it out and make this. And they were very beautiful, faultlessly done. And there was a lovely sort of grey sort of, thing moving her away from this, from the pot. And she said, Jyotindra asked her, what's this? And she said, when the pots are being in the oven, he said the smoke, escapes. And she said, I wanted to get that grey smoke trapped into my pot. Now, this is something that, it's someone who was thinking of it. So that was the answer. Then there was one who made beautiful sort of houses, out of terracotta, and painted them and all sorts. And they had little windows and all this, and there little birds and this, popping out of the windows. And so Jyotindra asked her, what's this? And she said, well, you see, I could not have a child. And so my husband, threw me out of the house. And she said, I was put into another little house thing, and I felt very alone. So I decided to make myself a house with a lot of windows, and then all the birds would come in and welcome me and come to me. And it was, so they're all thinking of things. It's not that they're just, doing sort of a mass-produced, and I thought it was wonderful that someone like, Jyotindra then called it, called the exhibition, The Other Masters. It was written about in Time magazine and also, because it made a lot of sense. We just dismiss that.
Okay, let's hear questions, or if anyone wants to say anything.
It seems that the time you're describing was quite different from the one we're in right now, where craft itself has been industrialized to a certain extent. The cottage emporium, which at one point was in Delhi, was a place bastion where you could go find incredible handcrafted objects. Today is really a shell of itself, and there are initiatives like Tribes India, etc., where I think artists are almost encouraged to reproduce things they've done before, whatever sells, etc. And you're left with this deracinated Madhubani painting or Bon painting or this thing that I think almost it's made into an archetype, a bird and a tree and a deer or something like that. And it feels like a very different time from what you're describing with Jyotirindra Jain's exhibition, with what Haku was doing, with what Swaminathan did in Bhopal. Again, a building designed by Charles Correa seems to be a trope here.
Just in bastard paintings also.
What is it? What shifted? At what point? How do we end up from there, which seems like such a glorious time, not so long ago, maybe in the 70s, 80s, maybe even through the 90s? What shifted in the last 20 or 30 years that we reached this place where craft is now this mass-produced, anonymized thing, that we cannot consume, but it really doesn't have that essence that you're speaking of, that these artists imbued it with. We lost the other master in some sense.
Yes, but everything grows, So the Jayakar loom and all this was just, otherwise you just had a plain ordinary hand loom. Then the Jayakar was a step further, and so there's always, something moving forward. And today, the computer is used on the loom, and the Jayakar was a forerunner of the computer. But there are lots of modern weavers who use the computer a lot, and so I think with the artificial intelligence, you have a completely different kind of, art also.
I think there's a need to acknowledge that there would be, that there would be creativity that's involved, which you cannot take away. And I feel that today, if there is somebody practicing craft in some way, if they're allowed the freedom to imagine, they are creating very, very beautiful craft. And it's at another level than what you used to do years and years ago. They are hopefully there. I find that it's rejuvenating. Of course, the market for the mass-produced craft really exists. So I hope that more people are encouraged to see the works that were there earlier and then want to create them.
I think the difference between art and what you described is that there was this I don't think there were silos. Nobody thought encouraging each art form to its best in separate silos. So you have at the weaver centers, you have, as you described it, you have crafts, you have weavers, you have artists, you have international visitors coming in, paintings from all over the country. You don't see that today. You don't see it. The fine art is very separate from the craft, and the artist himself, unlike say Haku Shah, who was doing pottery and painting, very few actually doing that kind of multidisciplinary art in terms of material within their practice. So is it because you think education is different now? Art education is different, and there's no encouragement in the art schools or within fine art degrees that allows this kind of cross-dimensional ideas and experimentation to happen, and the artists themselves are coming into their own.
Maybe you could answer that, being an educationist.
I think just from my sliver of art teaching, I felt that I've had many students who have kind of pushed against the digital and want to make work with more material installation, off the wall, things you can touch and things you can walk around. So I see a lot of artists making work with textiles of a very different kind, not quite like the artists you might know, but things where materials are kind of like really played with in hybrid forms, meaning so there's digital technologies alongside in the weaving of the but it's in the fight, yeah.
They're using different materials, but within making something for the fine art space. Whereas so they make there's a distinction that they make between, say, a pure craft form. So you wouldn't see something like as pure as what we saw in the other room, the kind of terracotta pot, the shape. You wouldn't see that alongside with their paintings. I know what you're saying, that they're pushing and going back to say analog and using textile, using metal, using bronze and gold. But it's in a very, it's in a different idiom.
But I think it's changing. Like I've seen shows with a very fine Los Angeles gallery called David Kordansky of a potter who made small, what he called weed pots, and they were produced for giving in bake sales and in small craft shows. And then suddenly it's in a super blue chip gallery, incredibly installed by another artist. In fact, the thread that I'm actually interested in is how artists pay attention to other artists and pick it up or find ways to kind of promote the work outside of the other channels of gallerists or dealers or other kinds of people. And in that example, it was a very fine show, posthumous, but again, it's work that would never be seen in an art space per se. But again, installed spectacularly beautiful catalog, and you suddenly understand that the work is very, very important. Even if it was by the artist and the gallery, they collected it from eBay and Etsy and all of these sources. They pulled all that work back out of a commercial enterprise and brought it back as an art thing. It's one example.
Because
Yeah.
we seem to have lost that kind of using our traditional art forms. We seem to have kind of gone the last 2 decades aping kind of a complete Western education of the arts. So I hope that kind of come back.
But I feel there is a possibility because a lot of even what Haku Shah is recognizing, it's coming kind of different from an ethnographer's eye or even a craft gallery going out and acquiring. You know, if you look at the horses with just the holes, which are the cylinders, and then you see that in the face, they're fantastic. They're absolutely abstract. If you look at the American artist Simone Leigh, who was representing the US in the Venice Biennale, and look at her sculptures, she's drawing from African artifacts from centuries ago, and you can find this kind of incredible abstraction right under our nose. I think they're like extraordinary. I'd never kind of paid attention to them closely.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful conversation today. I think I have a conclusion on this. It's a question, but something that I struggle with, right? So I think one, in the period that Haku Shah is documenting the crafts, which is largely Adivasi folk craft, that it's also period of the promise of an inclusive nation in a way, right? That this is formation of a nation that belongs to everybody in basic experience, formation of the nation.
Can you just check if the mic's on then?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Can you hear, Monika? It's not on yet, I think. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I was just, it's a kind of confusion because when Haku Shah was documenting doing his work with Adivasi craftsmen, it was during a nascent stage of the nation formation, where the promise, at least, in whatever farcical decades then was of an inclusive form of nation. Today, there is quite outrightly, I mean, it's totally untethered, right, to Adivasi rights, to land, to what the craft actually means. Because again, as you said, there's no difference between the work, between the livelihood, or between the art and the. So what, I guess, what does it mean then, and how do you read this documentation, or do you value documentation really, when that promise is blatantly kind of negated? And it's just something I'm really struggling with because also there has been, I mean, quite aside from documentation for preservation, there's like loss for whom, is it for them, is it for the city person, the appropriation as well.
Monika, do you have?
I can't hear.
Oh, you can't hear. Okay. I think it's a very important and powerful question, especially of the moment, because if you think this is done very kind of neutrally, it isn't actually. Once you start reading the interviews closely, you will find statements put in very casually where they say that this potter from this community, they're not allowed to eat in Muslim homes, they're not allowed to eat in Dalit or other homes. So these dividing lines were there, but they just took it for granted, that that is how the potter lived his life and those were the rules by which they lived in the community. But nobody was asking, or at least these questions don't seem to point to any discomfort or anyone trying to push against those boundaries and what that might have done. I think it would be interesting to kind of read it, or important actually to read what has happened in all of these different communities in North and South Gujarat to see whether things have changed. But I don't think Haku Shah was pointedly, at least from my kind of relatively modest reading, asking those questions directly. Though I know that when I was a student in the early 80s, we did a village study and we would go to a village and measure draw the whole village and make drawings. And we stayed in the village, and it's very much like Haku Shah's own documentation of village life. And me and another classmate were assigned the Harijan home to measure draw. And it was very clear. Their houses were on the outside, their wells were different, they didn't come to the panchayat meetings. All of those were like right on the table. But we as students we were part of that group, we stayed with them, we made the work, but it didn't go further. Now I feel like, even our documentation and these measure drawings were done in the spirit of plain documentation without bringing any of these elements in. But I think it's urgent and important. I don't know how it would be done with a level of depth and candor to be able to speak more pointedly about it.
I think what she's saying is that there was space in those days. That space is shrinking. Right. The space for tribal art, for tribal lives and livelihoods, that's disappearing. So how do we deal with that? Isn't that what you're asking at one level? It's all, those spaces have disappeared. What India in the 50s and 60s was is not India of the 2025. Right. And I think, somebody asked, I think 91 also brought a big change, I think, in this country with liberalization, everything. It all just changed overnight almost, or maybe in the next 10 years everything changed. And at one level, I think craft also is the handmaiden of poverty. And, right. And as poverty sort of disappears, I suppose these lifestyles also disappear. I don't know. It's something to do. So then you have all this, you talk about people taking inspiration from this work, but then is that appropriation? Where do you draw those lines? I don't know what the answers are.
I think the spaces for artists, which is what I was alluding to, like the legal centers, those don't exist anymore. That kind of intermingling. So you have the JJ, and you have that kind of discipline. And I'm talking specifically about India. Because through the students' biennale, I know they were trying to address that in the colleges that they were reaching out to. And primarily they were still only teaching painting, sculpture, and printmaking. Whereas, as Monika says, everything moves on, but that wasn't coming. And outside of those spaces, I think the 50s and 60s had a lot going on. The festivals of India coming in, and those kind of things that were pulling things out and bringing them in. So you could have an artist like Haku Shah, but I'm saying, but I think even Keshav is alluding to in art in the last 20 or 30 years. We don't see practices like that. We don't see, that span from photography to documentation and to really, this kind of making it special. But that kind of time, I don't think artists give to their practice. It's the basis first. And I think 91 made a huge difference. I think we were so self-absorbed also with ourselves and young people, and then it was all distribution.
Hi, dear Kishan. I think this conversation has taken so many trajectories, but before I come down back to Haku Bhai, I thought I should say that you should also remember Bhaskar Kulkarni, who worked with, he works with the Adivasis, and he's documented quite a lot of work. He was, of course, working with Pupul, Jayakar at that time. But bringing the conversation back to Haku Bhai, the reason why we are mostly here, I had the advantage of having a festival at Haku Shah in the mid-90s. We did it at the Birdla Academy, where I was curator there. And it was Dashrath Patel who told me, why don't you look at this work, go to Ahmedabad, look at this work. They were such a lovely couple. And Monika, you began your conversation about something pure. I think Haku Bhai had that certain purity. He had a certain innocence about him. Everything he did, everything he approached, had that clear, clean-minded innocence, which that transparency you really don't see today amongst artists or craftspeople. We did a show, and it all began as an exhibition of paintings. But then he said, include my little things from his showcase. He had a showcase with him. We brought those. And because we brought those, we expanded the exhibition into a festival. Because we got municipal children to come in, we got schools from South Bombay to also come in. He did pottery with them, he did kites with them, taught them how to make kites. The kids knew about a kite, but they never knew how to make it. He did collage with them, and he did a small weaving workshop. So you see, one thing led to another, and it just flowed. There was no, what are we doing, why are we doing, no calculation, nothing. He and his wife, both of them would be there with us all the time. And I think his 3-week show went to about a month and a half. Selling the works, making sure it was an exhibition that sold out, was hardly anybody's concern, including ours, because we were the bit like that. Not that we were very rich, but we were sustaining ourselves. But all his work sold, and he was very, very happy about it. I like the way he also wanted to talk to younger artists. From JJ, from Rachna, he would call them all over, and we would walk sometimes from Bendre Academy, which was at Century Bhavan, all the way to Beaver Service Center. And there, of course, I personally had friends, he knew even more people. Adi Breaker was there, and all the other artists, Thacker was there, Bendre was there.
Oh.
We got to sit around and talk, and he was so comfortable with all of them. That's when I knew this is where this man comes from. He had a great mind, that's what I would say, and a very, very good soul. I was very blessed working with him.
Starting with Stella Kamrish.
Yes.
Anyone else have anything to add? This has been a really special, beautiful conversation here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Monica. So,
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Pradeep.
Sure.
Thank you for pulling all of that out for us. It was really, really special. Thank you so much.
and if anyone wants to see the books, there are a few of them here.
Pradeep has pulled some out from his personal collection. So you must really admire.
Hmm?